Hi, everybody. It's Sam Agro, artist on Cauldron Forbidden Appetites, and you're listening to True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Sam Agro about his contribution to the new Cauldron Forbidden Appetites anthology and more. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Based in Ontario, Sam Agro began his career in 1983 after completing an animation course at Sheridan College, working as a storyboard artist in the animation industry, producing hundreds of storyboards for shows like Ewoks and Droids, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The New Adventures of Johnny Quest, The Care Bears, and The Ripping Friends. He's also provided storyboards for Universal Soldier 2 and 3, along with the Saw 3 and 4 movies. Sam has written for TVO's Polka Dot Shorts, the animated segments of Elliot Moose is on the Loose, and many scripts for DC's Looney Tunes and the Cartoon Network Block Party Comics. He also creates storyboards for the very popular Paw Patrol. Sam's latest illustration project is a contribution to the Cauldron Forbidden Appetites anthology. Cauldron Forbidden Appetites is a deluxe high-quality archival hardcover anthology that's described as art house meets grindhouse. Published by Raid Press as an homage to the creepy and airy magazines of the past, this anthology collects the edgy contemporary supernatural tales found in Cauldron magazine into one complete offering for mature readers. So, without further ado, with Sam Agro about his contribution to the new Cauldron Forbidden Appetites anthology and more. So, Sam Agro, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me here, John. It's nice to be back.
Absolutely. It's great chatting with you. I know we've got some cold weather outside, but it's nice to be inside, and we're all staying warm these days at least. So there you go.
I'm doing my best to stay warm, but it's a challenge right now.
I tell you, yeah. So before we get to all the questions, I want to ask you, what's on your bedside reading table? What are you reading today?
Well, I'm reading something called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And it's sort of a fantasy novel by an author named V.E. Schwab, Victoria Schwab. And I've never read anything by her before, but I'm quite enjoying it. I'm about halfway through. It's a really fun little fantasy story. It takes place in basically two time periods, or several time periods, but basically two, 17th century France and today. So this young woman is about to be sort of married off to someone she doesn't love by her family, and she sort of makes a deal with not exactly the devil, but sort of a devilish, malevolent spirit. She ends up being basically immortal until she decides she doesn't want to live anymore, and this spirit comes to take her soul. But she's also had to make this sacrifice. No one can remember her. So she meets people, and while she's with them, they are aware she's there and everything, but as soon as she walks away after 3 or 4 minutes, everyone forgets her. So she has this long life, but she can't ever connect with people. So it's a really interesting idea, and so far she's telling the story very well. I recommend. I don't know how it's going to end, but so far I recommend it.
Very good. Well, we're here talking about your contribution to the Kickstarter project Cauldron Forbidden Appetites. It's an anthology of previous Cauldrons, and there's new content, and I understand that you were part of that. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about your contribution to that book.
Yeah, well, basically, Sam Noir, who's sort of kind of adopted me creatively about 3 years ago, we had sort of known each other, but we got to know each other a little bit better. He started to ask me to collaborate with him on a few things. So there's a couple of things that we've done together so far, but this is a 5-page sort of bookend story for the book. The book is basically a collection of the previous 4 issues of Cauldron magazine, but there is some new material, including a story written by Sam Noir and illustrated by me, which, as I said, is going to bookend. So you'll see part of the story at the beginning of the book and part of the story at the end of the book. And it features Satanella, this this character that Sam created, and she's also kind of a malevolent spirit, and she appears in several stories in Cauldron magazine, and he's got a sort of a whole meta, construction of different ways that she interacts with different characters in different stories. And then there's also the host, the normal host of the Cauldron books, the Dweller in the Cellar. It's basically a sort of in the wraparound story that we do, Satanella and the Dweller in the Cellar are kind of butting heads over who's hosting the magazine. And it does not end well.
Oh my. Now, for those not familiar with it, this is a Raid Press publication, and it was designed as an homage to creepy and airy magazines of the past. Was that something that you read?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, sadly, John, I'm old enough that yes, I read Creepy and Eerie magazine when I was younger.
Oh yeah.
I came into it in the mid to late 70s when I was about 16, 17 years old. Around that time, it was Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella were the three magazines that were published by Warren Publications. Jim Warren, who was out of what was it, San Diego, or I guess it was LA. Maybe it was LA. I'm not sure. But anyway, so they were three horror magazines, and each one sort of had a host. One was Uncle Creepy for Creepy magazine, Cousin Eerie for Eerie magazine, and Vampirella, she was the storyteller as well, but she was also the star of the main story every issue of the book. And these were sort of old school. Originally, they were in the 60s. They were sort of old school horror stories, with the sort of EC twist ending kind of thing. But in the 70s, they sort of expanded out into somewhat more. They were doing some traditional stuff, but they also had some more experimental stuff that was more influenced by some of the slasher movies that came along in the 70s, and really interesting publications. And that's when I came in the 70s. And they also, around that time, started bringing in, they had a lot of terrific talent from Spain. They had terrific guys from Manila, guys like Alex Nino and artists like that who did some terrific artwork for them in the 70s. But they also brought in a lot of terrific American illustrators like Bernie Wrightson and Corbin. And gosh, and I'm going to fail to remember all the names of these guys, but they brought back a lot of those guys too. And I got heavily into it for quite a while, and followed it basically until the magazines kind of the company kind of folded, and those properties were kind of sort of orphaned for a while. But then Vampirella was later picked up by another publisher, and they did a bunch of new stories with her.
Yeah, I remember those books. I mean, I was a little bit younger, and they were always a little bit higher on the newsstand at the stores. And it's like, well, Archie's and Batman, they're down here, but man, look at those magazines way up there. That means they're more adult, maybe. Ooh,
they look pretty enticing, don't they? With those, the scantily clad women and monsters on the. And then I don't know that the monsters were scantily clad. I guess some of them were, but
that horror stuff that would keep you up at night. I tell you, some of those stories.
So anyway, yes, the short answer should have been yes. The Cauldron magazine was an homage to the old Eerie and Creepy magazine, but with obviously a much more modern kind of tone to the stories and the artwork.
Sure, absolutely. Now, you mentioned your collaborator, Sam Noir, and talked a little bit about the stories themselves, but how did you two work together? Did Sam come up with a script and said, here you go, can you put something together, or how did it work?
He basically said, do you want to do this intro story, this bookend story? And I'd already done another story with him featuring Satanella, which is going to appear in a later issue of Cauldron. In the late 70s and into the 80s, Marvel also did a lot of horror magazines. They had a lot of black and white magazines anyway, like Savage Sword of Conan and stuff like that. Sam wanted to do a sort of an homage to a kind of a Marvel style horror comic story. And he wanted it to feature this character, Satanella. And he wanted it to have a sort of a blaxploitation feel to it. So it was sort of a horror story, and it's got werewolves, and it's got Satanella, who's basically a demon in a woman's body. And it was a huge amount of fun to do. We had a really terrific time working on it together. And so subsequently, he asked me to do this story with Satanella and the Dweller in the Cellar. We really went back more to the EC kind of feeling for this. So it's a little bit more cartoony, almost not quite, but almost a Mad Magazine or early Mad Magazine feeling to the artwork. So that's my story, which is going to be the bookends. But there's reprints of all the other stories that appeared in the first 4 issues. But there's also another new story by Jonathan Kosuba and yet another one by Sam Noir and Shane Heron. There's older stuff in this that they're trying to get out into a wider audience, but there's also a fair bit of new stuff between these 3 stories, and there's a brand new wraparound cover, and that looks fantastic. It's going to be a terrific book.
Yeah, I understand it's going to be deluxe, high-quality hardcover for people who haven't been able to get a hold of the previous issues. It's like all in one package. It sounds like it's got a great deal.
Well, I don't know if it's only going to be a hardcover or whether there's going to be a hardcover and softcover. I assume usually with Kickstarters, they like to give the people who are contributing a wide range of options. So I suspect you will be able to get a paperback, but I could be wrong about that. I haven't specifically asked Sam about that, so I don't know for sure.
Well, I'm sure all the details will be listed on the Kickstarter page once it goes live.
Yes, once it goes live, all will be revealed.
Sure. Now, let's talk about the tools you use specifically for these bookend stories. Did you use any different types of tools, or how did you put it together?
No. Well, again, it was sort of supposed to have an old school feeling to it. Mm-hmm. So, I did it the way I normally do it, which is old school. So it's mostly brush and ink wash. There's a little bit of pen work here and there. I did some very, very minor corrections digitally, but mostly it was all done on paper in the old-fashioned technique. Our particular story is black and white because they wanted it to have a different feel from the color stuff in the middle of the book. It's going to be printed in black and white, just as I drew it, without color, and it'll lead you into the wide variety of terrific color stories that are in between.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it lends itself to that type of feel, to those old creepy and eerie magazines.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to evoke. So it was great fun to do because I said it's a little bit cartoony, which was fun for me, and it's also quite kind of sort of old EC in your face gross. Some very kind of unpleasant things go down. And me being a big horror fan, that was a lot of fun to do too.
Sure, absolutely. Now, we've been talking about Cauldron quite a bit here, but I want to ask you, what else are you working on? What's your next project?
Well, I think, as I said before when we did our last interview, that my day job is working in the animation business. So currently, for the last few years, I've been working on Paw Patrol. So I do storyboards for Paw Patrol, and that keeps me fairly busy. But I have an interesting schedule where I work 1 month on and 1 month off. So I do 6 boards over the year, and that affords me quite a bit of time to kind of do my own thing in between doing these storyboards. And I would say the main thing is the werewolf story that I mentioned. That's going to appear sometime, I think, quite a bit later this year. Sam wanted to have a fake painted cover for that story. So like the story is inside the magazine, but it's like you're reading a magazine from the 70s. So he wanted a painted cover for that magazine. I have yet to do that painted cover. Yeah, the werewolf story is done, but the painted cover has yet to be taken care of. So I'm going to be trying to take care of that either this month or in 2 months from now when I get another break.
Sure, we're all in good time. Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I'm working on. Also, I'm sort of preparing some new sketches. I hopefully will be appearing at the March Toronto Comic-Con. I'm currently at the drawing table creating some new prepared sketches to take with me to the show. And of course, I'll be also at the show doing commissions on site. So you can buy one of the pre-drawn ones or you can get one of your own.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Is that something that you like interacting with folks at these shows? I know that I've seen you at a few and we've talked. How is it? Yeah, is it something that's rewarding to you?
I really do like it. I used to do improv and sketch comedy, so I'm a big ham anyway. So I really enjoy talking to people, and I try to be funny and charming. with, limited success, I'm sure. But
No.
no, I do enjoy it. I will say, the nature of Comic Cons has changed pretty drastically over the years. It used to be more of a sort of a closed community, I guess, if you want to put it that way. I'm not saying that was a good thing, but it was sort of like almost anybody that came up to look at your artwork was probably a comics fan. Whereas today you get a lot of people coming to Comic Con who are not necessarily specifically comics fans. They may like the stuff from the movies, or they may be there for the TV and film stars who appear. Of course, there's a lot of cosplay going on now, which there was always some, but now it's sort of become a very big deal. A lot of people really love to do cosplay. And of course, we have professional cosplayers now.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those people, they're not really interested in comics per se. So it can be a little harder to sort of strike up a conversation about comics at a Comic-Con, which sounds strange. That's kind of the way it is. And, I think it's great that the Comic-Con has sort of expanded its parameters. I would say it's maybe a little bit less fun for me now than it was maybe 10 years ago. Actually, I'm not sure we had Toronto Comic-Con then, but, before Fan Expo was Fan Expo, it was a much smaller deal.
Right.
And I went to that for a long time before it started to really kind of double and triple its traffic. I think sort of in the before times, I felt more like everybody there was sort of cut from the same cloth. Whereas today you get a very wide range of people, and some of them are interested in comics and some of them are not.
Yeah, I think pop culture has really exploded. And I think you're absolutely right there. It's brought in like people who are into gaming, people into cosplay. The beauty of these shows now, it's like a little bit of everything for everybody. And you don't have to be like in your own little niche corner. You can explore more things, and it's very wide open. You can go and, one end maybe play a game, or another end you could see swords, or another one you could go talk to an artist, right? And all under one roof, or see a celebrity too, right? Which is really cool.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't think any of these are bad things. I'm perfectly happy that that's the way that they've gone. And you never know, like sometimes people will come in because they're interested in one thing and they'll find something interesting in another area. And you start to get a little bit of crossover, which is good too. I'm not against this in any way. I'm just saying, for me personally, sitting behind the table, I think I had more fun conversations when it was a more closed group. So
sure. No, I get you.
That's the only point of view that I'm sort of saying I preferred in the old days. It's a little harder for me to get into Fan Expo now because it's become so huge, and so much American talent wants to get a table there. Offbeat kind of indie guys like me are having a little bit tougher time getting in. But usually the Comic-Con, which is a little bit more focused on the comics, usually I'm able to get a pro table there. I still love it. And, I'm also able to take a little cash away.
That's the main thing. There you go. Well, you mentioned
that's the main thing, but
well, you mentioned being a pro, and you are a professional in the comic book field. I want to ask you, given that background and expertise, what one piece of advice would you pass along to someone who wants to make their own book?
I think I would have two pieces of advice. One is plan out carefully, figure out your project pretty clearly before you start to pile in and do the actual work. If you're going to write it and draw it yourself, then I think you want to start thinking about your story, and you want to outline it. You want to sort of go, who are the characters? I think a lot of younger people, especially, they kind of go, oh, I've got an idea. And they kind of jump in and they start drawing wildly and creating pages. And then they kind of go, they run out of steam, and they sort of go like, oh, well, I'm not sure maybe this doesn't quite work, or, I'm not sure where I'm going with the story. So I think plan it out. There's the old screenwriter's trick of, putting every scene in your story on, little 3x5 cards and putting them up on a cork board. I'm sure there's a fantastic digital alternative to that today, but, plan out the scenes of your story, figure out who the characters are and what those characters want, and figure things out. And then once you've sort of got a really solid kind of, and don't just plan one issue. If it's a 5-issue or an 8-issue arc, plan the whole thing from beginning to end. plan it within issues, or if you're going to do it as a graphic novel, you don't have to separate it into issues at all. But I think planning is sort of the overlooked element for a lot of people who start to get involved in this. Figure out what the story you want to tell is and who the characters involved in it are and how they interact. And if you've got a point that you want to make, not every story has to have a point. It might just be a fun action story. Maybe you've got an idea of some theme that you want to express as well. So figure that all out before you start actually writing dialogue and breaking down pages and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's great advice. Now we've been talking about a lot of stuff here, so I'm wondering, where do you recommend people go online to find out about your current and your future projects?
Well, unfortunately, being the old codger that I am, I have only one social media outlet, and that is Facebook. So you can find me on Facebook, Samuel Agro, and I have my avatar is a little drawing of the Incredible Hulk that I did, and I think my heading image is a picture of me and my wife drinking cocktails or something like that. So that's me. The only thing I ask people to do is, before you send me a friend request, send me a note, like a private message on Facebook, and just say, hi, I heard the interview with John and I want to be your friend. And I'll say, great, send me a friend request, and we'll do it that way, just so I know who I'm dealing with.
Sounds good. Well, Sam, those really are all the questions, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you want to get across in this interview?
I don't think so, other than, I will say this, just to go back to the Cauldron collection for a little bit. I mean, there are so many talented local people involved with this. You know, there's Casey Parsons, Shane Heron, Ricky Lima, Daniel Wong, Aaron Ong, Aaron Feldman, Gwen Howard. Like, there's like, the list goes on and on. Matthew Tavares. There's like so many terrific artists and writers involved in this book. I just wanted to mention that when Sam and I did the opening story, Ramon Perez also went over my rough pages and made a few suggestions. He was super helpful for improving the layouts for that story. I think that's worth mentioning. He was very generous with his time there, and both Sam and I appreciated it.
Thanks to Sam for the chat. You can discover more about Sam on Facebook at Samuel Agro. And you can check out Cauldron Forbidden Appetites on Kickstarter. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And remember to check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. You can follow along at True North Country Comics on most social media sites. Remember to please send any and all feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. I want to hear from you. So thanks for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2024.